It's always a terrible shock to lose a sibling, someone you have grown up with and shared experiences and emotional ups and downs with. Both of the following two Weird World viewers have lost a brother and were perhaps helped in their grieving when the departed very much made their survival known and unique presence felt. Doting Uncle. Neely Ivy lives in Tennessee in the US. She says that growing up, her grandmother always told her that we are all born with gifts, and she believes her to be very right. The story about her brother also describes what she underwent as her second near-death experience. On January 10th, 2022, Neely was pregnant with her fourth child. At about 5 p.m. that day, she and her husband Blake received terrible news about her little brother Dylan, who was 21 years old. He had been tragically shot and was being airlifted to a hospital a few towns away. Tragically, he passed away late that night, surrounded by their father, mother, brother, and Neely and her husband. She says that she was the one speaking to him as he left this world, and even though he wasn't conscious at the time, she knew that he heard her. Not 3 months after this, on April 5th of 2022, Neely went into labour. She says that it all happened so fast, by the time they arrived at the hospital, she was already dilated to 9.5, nearly the maximum extent, and it was time to start pushing. There was no time for an epidural or any other intervention. She remembers that everything was going smoothly until she started to black out. This was when her perceptions became foggy and time slowed down. She remembers her head starting to fall back onto her husband and then machines making noise. She then became unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she was floating above her body and watched as medical staff poured into the room. She tried speaking, but nobody heard her. She felt no pain during this time, just a lightness. Then she felt a hand starting to push her head downward. She looked up to see her late brother Dylan. He said to her, "Sissy, you have to go back. It's not your time. They need you. You have to go back." Follow Blake's voice. "It's almost over. One more push and he will be here. I love you, Sissy." She notes that at the time they had no idea of her baby's gender. They were waiting until after the birth to find out. Everything went black again, which was when Neely genuinely returned to reality in her own body, which was surging with pain. She sat straight up, realising she was hooked up to oxygen, and told her husband that she was okay, she had seen her brother, and that the baby was a boy. She told everyone around her that she just needed to push once more. The doctors were puzzled, the nurses were asking what had happened, but her doctor gave her permission to push. To everyone's delight, her baby son arrived and they were both fine. She gave the new boy the middle name of Dylan, which was her brother's first name. Neely and Dylan were kept in the hospital for a week in order for the medicos to run some tests, and before they were discharged, her doctor came to talk to her alone. She asked Neely what she had seen. Neely related her experience to her, and the doctor replied that she had seen so many odd things happen in her career. Although she had been reprimanded for letting Neely push after having lost consciousness and her oxygen and heart rate going down, her intuition had told her that that was what was needed to be done. Neely believes that her brother saved her, and she continues to feel his presence around her and her family. She also related that when she was still in the hospital after giving birth to Waylon Dylan, the nurses reported seeing a tall blonde man walk into her room after visiting hours. They immediately came into her room to ask him to leave, but on entering her hospital room found that there was nobody there besides the baby and Neely. She then showed them a photograph of her brother and they said, yes, that's him. When she explained that he had passed away 3 months prior to that, they were all astonished. She feels that Dylan has maintained a constant presence around her children, in particular his infant nephew. She says that her son Waylon acts as if he knows her brother, even though they unfortunately have never met in this life. She says that he can head straight for Dylan's grave without being shown the way, that he sleeps with a photo of her brother near his crib, and constantly talks to someone who she cannot see. Her oldest son, who is 5, also seems to sense his presence, and told Neely that her brother held her baby's hand until it was time for him to be born on Earth. Always the prankster. Warren was born and raised in Southern California and living in Norwalk, California, when these strange experiences took place after his brother Dan passed away. Warren and his wife have since moved to Reno, Nevada a few years ago, but here he relates what happened after his brother passed away in their living room. It was back in 2009 that Dan was having marital problems. He came to stay with Warren and his wife for a while and was very upset because of his separation from his wife. About 2 weeks into his stay with Warren, their mother found him sitting deceased in one of the living room chairs. The tragic event turned out to have resulted from a heart attack, which they suspected was brought on by the stress of his situation. The night before Dan's funeral, his wife came to Warren's house. As she was a smoker, Warren, with his wife and mother, sat out on the front porch while his sister-in-law had a cigarette. He explains that the lock on the front door was old and it was noisy whenever it was locked or unlocked. As the group sat talking, all 3 of Warren, his mother and wife heard the door lock. Warren had to climb in through a window to unlock the door and get them all back inside. A couple of nights after Dan's funeral, at around 10 p.m, Warren arrived home from work, then walked through the living room towards the kitchen. Just in front of the chair that his brother had passed away in, he walked into a cold spot. The only way he can explain the sensation is that it felt like he stepped into a pile of laundry or towels on the floor. He walked into the kitchen, turned on the lights, and looked back into the living room. Nothing was out of place and nothing was on the floor. About a week later, he and his wife started to repeatedly find the kitchen back door wide open. This continued to happen for a few months. About every second day in the morning, the back door in the kitchen would be wide open to the backyard. One morning in particular stands out in Warren's memory. It was about 5 a.m. and still dark when Warren went to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee, being the only one up at the time. The coffee maker was situated right next to the back door, which was closed when he started to make the coffee. When he came back 5 minutes later, the back door was wide open. Warren stood there for a second and then said, "Are you here?" He then distinctly heard his brother Dan's voice say, "Yes, I am." That was the only time he heard Dan's voice after he passed, and Warren knows it was him. After a while, he and his wife again started experiencing doors being locked from time to time. Warren even went as far as changing the doorknobs, but still they would walk out the front or back door and come back to find themselves locked out of the house. Car keys also started to go missing, only to be found in strange places, like kitchen and bathroom drawers. After 3 or 4 months, everything settled down in his home. Warren says that his brother was a prankster in life and he believes that this was his way of showing he was still around.